Welcome to DD History, where we try to tell compelling stories of the past. We hope you enjoy and join us for more videos in the future. Today we're talking about two brothers who changed the world forever, not with swords or crowns or even by discovering a new continent, but by teaching a giant box with wings how to fly. That's right, the Wright brothers. Now you might be thinking, planes? Big deal. I just got crammed into one last summer next to a guy who thought shoes were optional. But in 1903, when Orville and Wilbur Wright rolled their strange-looking machine out onto the sandy dunes of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, the idea of humans flying wasn't just science fiction. It was fantasy. People had been trying for centuries. Most attempts ended with broken wings, broken bones, and occasionally broken dignity. But these two bicycle mechanics from Ohio had a dream, and unlike most dreamers, they had the patience and spare parts to make it happen. So how did a pair of brothers with no fancy degrees and no government funding manage to succeed where everyone else failed? Before we get to Kitty Hawk and flying machines, let's back things up. Because you can't really understand how Orville and Wilbur Wright pulled off the first powered flight without knowing who they were, where they came from, and how two kids from Ohio ended up chasing birds in the sky. The Wright brothers didn't come from money or nobility or even some elite family of scientists. Nope. They were born into a perfectly ordinary, if slightly quirky, Midwestern household. Their father, Milton Wright, was a bishop in the Church of the United Brethren in Christ. That meant he was a strict religious man, but not in the everything is boring way. He actually encouraged his children to read, to question, to invent, and to think for themselves. Their mother, Susan Catherine Kerner Wright, was just as important. She was the practical one, with a talent for tinkering. She could build things, fix appliances, and wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. In many ways, the brothers inherited their curiosity and mechanical skills from her. So, what kind of kids were Orville and Wilbur? Well, not exactly the type to sit quietly in class. They were restless, creative, and constantly fiddling with things. Their father once brought home a small toy helicopter made of cork, bamboo, and rubber bands. It wasn't very big, but when you wound it up, the thing flew into the air and hovered before fluttering back down. That toy lit a fire in the brothers' minds. Imagine two little boys watching something mechanical fly. Their brains practically shouted, "If a toy can do it, why not us?" And just like that, the seed of flight was planted. But here's the thing, life wasn't smooth sailing. Wilbur, the older brother, was originally on track to go to Yale. Yep, the Ivy League. But a freak accident changed everything. He got smacked in the face with a hockey stick during a neighborhood game, lost most of his front teeth, and spent years battling health issues and depression afterward. Suddenly, his bright future dimmed, and college slipped away. Instead of Yale, Wilbur stayed home in Dayton, Ohio, and while that might sound like a dead end, it actually turned out to be the twist of fate that kept the brothers together. Orville, a few years younger, wasn't a straight-A student either. He was more interested in pranks, gadgets, and eventually printing his own little neighborhood newspaper. By their late teens, the two had teamed up to start businesses together. First, they ran that printing press. Then they moved into building and fixing bicycles, because in the 1890s, bicycles were the hot new thing. Imagine it, roads filled with these clunky, chain-driven contraptions, and suddenly, everyone wanted one. Orville and Wilbur weren't just fixing bikes, they were innovating. They designed new models, improved the steering, and earned a reputation as clever mechanics. And here's the kicker, those bicycle skills, balancing, steering, mechanical design, they would all prove crucial when it came time to build flying machines. Meanwhile, the world was buzzing with attempts at human flight. There were gliders, hot air balloons, and even some brave or foolish inventors strapping wings to their arms and jumping off cliffs. Spoiler, those usually ended in disaster. But the Wright brothers were watching, learning, and, most importantly, not laughing it off. By the 1890s, they were reading everything they could find about aviation. They devoured articles, studied the work of pioneers like Otto Lilienthal in Germany, and began experimenting themselves. For them, flight wasn't just some crazy dream. It was a puzzle to be solved. Their approach was simple but brilliant. Don't start by imagining some huge, impossible machine. Start small, test, tinker, fail, improve, repeat. That little toy helicopter from their childhood? It had planted the flying bug, and the Wright brothers weren't about to let it go. Before we dive into gliders, sand dunes, and the windy beaches of Kitty Hawk, let's take a quick pit stop. If you're enjoying this story of the Wright brothers and want to hear more amazing tales from history, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us keep bringing history to life, sometimes with a smile, sometimes with suspense, and always with a good story. And if you've already subscribed, thank you. You're officially part of the crew flying with us through history. All right, let's get back to the Wright brothers and see how two bicycle mechanics from Ohio turned into the first pilots in history. So, Wilbur and Orville Wright had caught the flying bug. But wanting to fly and actually flying are two very different things. It's like wanting to be a rock star because you own a guitar. You still have to learn chords, survive a few garage band disasters, and probably annoy your neighbors before you can sell out Madison Square Garden. The Wright brothers knew they needed to start with the basics. They weren't going to just strap wings on their arms and leap off a barn roof like kids in a cartoon, though rumor has it many brave, or foolish, souls tried exactly that in the 1800s. Instead, the brothers studied every scrap of information they could find about aeronautics. And here's the thing, there wasn't much. Books on flight at the time were, let's say, optimistic. They had plenty of drawings of people flapping giant bird wings, but very little in the way of working science. Some inventors believed you just needed a powerful enough engine and, voila, you'd be soaring through the skies like an eagle. Spoiler alert, that did not work. Engines were heavy. Early planes that tried it were basically fancy lawn darts. The Wrights realized they had to figure things out from scratch, and being practical Midwesterners, they started small, with gliders. In 1900, Wilbur wrote to the U.S. Weather Bureau and asked, "Hey, where in America has the steadiest, strongest winds?" The Weather Bureau answered, "North Carolina's Outer Banks." Perfect. Miles of open sand dunes, constant winds, and soft sand to cushion those inevitable oops moments. So off they went to Kitty Hawk, a tiny fishing village that suddenly had two strange Ohio bicycle mechanics dragging giant wings through the sand. The locals thought they were nuts. One fisherman said it best, "Them boys are gonna kill themselves." Their first glider was modest, 17 feet wide, built of spruce wood and cloth. It looked like a big kite, and honestly, that's basically what it was. They'd hold on, run down a hill, and let the wind lift them a few feet into the air. Sometimes it worked, sometimes they crashed, and sometimes they face-planted so hard the sand in their teeth probably lasted until Christmas. But every crash taught them something. They learned the wings needed more curvature, more of a bird-like shape to generate lift. They figured out balance wasn't just about weight, but about controlling the air itself. And here's where they made their biggest breakthrough, wing warping. Most inventors thought you should steer a plane like a boat, just point it left or right. The Wright brothers noticed birds twist their wings to control themselves in the air. So they asked, what if we twist our wings too? They rigged up a system of wires and pulleys that let them bend the wings ever so slightly. Pull one way, the right wing dips, the left wing rises. Pull the other way, and the opposite happens. This gave them control. Suddenly, flight wasn't just about staying up. It was about steering, turning, and not crashing into sand dunes like human comets. Their gliders improved with every season. By 1901, though, things weren't going as smoothly as they hoped. They built a bigger glider, expecting glorious soaring flights. Instead, it performed worse. It was unstable, awkward, and often refused to lift at all. Wilbur got so frustrated he said, "Man will not fly for 1,000 years." That's right. The guy who would fly 2 years later almost quit right there on the sand. But here's what made the Wrights special: they didn't give up. They went back to Ohio and built a wind tunnel. Yes, a homemade wind tunnel. They tested over 200 different wing shapes, measuring lift and drag. These two bicycle mechanics basically invented modern aeronautical engineering in their workshop. Armed with new data, they returned to Kitty Hawk in 1902 with a redesigned glider. This one was bigger, stronger, and, most importantly, controllable. It had their wing warping system, a movable rudder at the back, and wings shaped to match their wind tunnel data. This time, it worked. They flew hundreds of glides, some lasting nearly 30 seconds and covering hundreds of feet. That may not sound like much today, but back then, it was revolutionary. Other inventors could barely stay in the air without flipping over. The Wright brothers were soaring like actual pilots. People started to notice. Locals gathered to watch, jaws hanging open. Kids ran alongside the gliders like it was the coolest show in town. The Wright brothers weren't just dreamers anymore. They were the real deal. But there was still one major problem: power. Gliders were nice, but you couldn't exactly glide from Ohio to New York. If they wanted to truly fly, controlled, sustained, and powered, they needed an engine. Here's where the Wright brothers ran into another obstacle. They needed a lightweight engine that was powerful enough to lift their machine off the ground. At the time, automobile engines were heavy beasts. Slap one of those onto a plane, and you'd have something closer to a paperweight with wings. So, they did what they always did: built their own. With the help of their mechanic, Charlie Taylor, they designed a 12-horsepower gasoline engine that was compact, efficient, and just strong enough to get their plane airborne. But just strapping an engine onto the glider wasn't enough. They needed propellers. And here's where they made another brilliant leap. Instead of copying boat propellers, they studied airflow and realized propellers were just rotating wings. They carved 2 giant wooden propellers with the same precision as their glider wings. By late 1903, they had all the pieces: wings, control system, lightweight engine, and propellers. Now they just needed a test site. You can guess where they went: back to Kitty Hawk. The brothers returned with their new powered flyer, a fragile machine of wood, fabric, and wires, 40 feet wide and weighing about 600 pounds. It looked like something between a giant box kite and a science fair project gone mad. The locals once again showed up to watch. Some shook their heads, saying, "There go those crazy Wright boys again." Others quietly hoped they might just pull it off. In December 1903, the Wrights set up at Kill Devil Hills, a sandy slope near Kitty Hawk. The weather was brutal, cold, windy, and miserable. They had to wait days for the right conditions. They built a rail track to help launch the plane, and they flipped a coin to see who would fly first. Spoiler, Orville won. At this point, it wasn't a question of if anymore. It was when. The Wright brothers had solved the mysteries of lift, control, and propulsion. They had built a machine no one else in the world had managed. All that was left was to test it. And that's where we'll pause for now. The Wright brothers stood on the edge of history, their strange flying machine ready to prove that humans could finally conquer the skies. But would it actually work, or would it be another crash into the sand? Join us for the next video for the interesting conclusion to the men that dreamed big and changed the world forever.